Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, our industry breakout session. You will note from the title on the slide here that we started off thinking about AI and machine learning, and that's the session title in the program. But as we talked about it as a team and as we developed what we wanted to talk about today, we thought it would be much better to sort of take a step back and look at the wider context of each of AI and machine learning. And for us at Morressier, that really comes down to research integrity, whether it's using AI to automate manual processes or identifying AI generated text as part of your research integrity strategy. AI is simply one of the tech enabled mechanisms for powering research integrity solutions. So that's what we really want to talk about today. So to start, who we are, I want to introduce ourselves. I'm Samantha Green. I'm the head of content marketing at Morressier. We are joined by Jen Goodrich, our VP of product, and Othman Altalib, our chief growth officer. And if you have questions for us that you don't have a chance to answer today, you can also find us at booth 107 for the rest of the week. So to set the stage for this discussion, let's talk about the impact of integrated and interoperable tech solutions for the publisher or the society. So in the world of research integrity, that means that you can have a single tech solution with all different types of fraud detection, different types of AI. So maybe tech company 1 does citation analysis. Tech company 2 does AI generated text, another does plagiarism or image manipulation, and so on and so forth. And we can bring those all together into a centralized dashboard for research integrity. And the result of those integrations with all of those different tech companies is that you've got one dashboard, multiple volumes, many different integrity checks that different organizations can develop at their own pace, meaning that you can accelerate your research integrity in one place, in one time, with an agile roadmap. So this approach to research integrity tech solutions brings speed to the publisher. It's one vendor, no migration, and it can also bring cost benefit because not only are you publishing higher quality research faster, you have only one strategic tech partner, and you're able to take advantage of the entire technology ecosystem. And it allows for scale. These integrations mean that we can adapt to emerging and future threats really easily, and you can analyze your full portfolio with ease and grow with confidence as a publishing organization. So without further ado, we're going to approach the rest of this session as a discussion. So I'm going to ask Jen and Othman some questions and hopefully save some time for questions from the audience at the end as well. So to kick us off, we've talked about how agile tech solutions and this tech ecosystem really benefits publishers in terms of scale, speed, and cost. But how does this type of collaborative development help tech organizations like Morressier or others in the tech space? Jen, do you want to kick us off for this?
Sure. I'd say there's many companies doing interesting things in the industry today. And when you can focus intensely on something like research integrity, you can grow quickly, you can evolve quickly, you can provide value quickly. And I think from a publisher's perspective, it can be really hard to work with multiple tech vendors, signing multiple licenses, doing multiple integrations, worrying about whether they're keeping up to pace. So for a tech company, it's really helpful to collaborate with other tech companies and provide unified solutions back into the market. It gives everybody a chance to be successful.
Yeah, the rising tide lifts all ships.
Exactly.
Yeah. Othman, would you add anything?
Well, one, I just want to introduce myself. Hello, because we didn't get a chance to say hi. So thank you for joining the session, and really excited to a lot of this space, I think, is also conversation and learning and feedback, because every publisher sees different things. There are many things that are similar. There are many things that could be different, and it's the as an industry, how do we come together and learn from each other's successes, learn from each other's opportunities for growth, And I think that's the beauty of from the technical side of things, or looking at it from a technology point of view, you can somewhat abstract or separate from the day-to-day that's happening and say, okay, well, what's the problem? What are the patterns that we see in some of these challenges? And what are the patterns that we see in the growth in other technologies? I mean, it seems very similar to, like cybersecurity. I spent many years in the government space, and that becomes one of the top threats that you deal with. And so each agency is also being attacked from different angles. And so the collaboration between between the major players within the industry, between the different experiences, I think from a technology perspective, you can start to look at it and start to find the similarities, and you can then add configurations within those differences to actually bring it together. So I think much of the space that we're working within from a research integrity side of things is also, we don't know all the answers all the time, and it's going to be iterative. It's going to be a conversational and feedback loop that needs to continuously happen from a technology side of things, from a process side of the thing, from system sides of the thing, and also just what's being seen by all of you and by the editors and by authors and by the people that are interacting with the system day in and day out. I think that's where some of the great innovations start to come. And so I think it's that collaboration.
Yeah, so I'd love to build off of that a little bit. I'm always so interested in kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit and how we build these collaborations and how we make sure that they are effective and functional, and how do we sort of build in a way that is configurable and easily interoperable. So we talk about these things a lot. So can we give a little bit of insight into how that happens on the kind of mechanic side? Jen, I'm going to start with you again.
Yeah, well, we are, as we're building out solutions and we're working with other tech partners, we're really doing it iteratively and incrementally, and we're focused intensely on experimentation. So I think that helps a lot in terms of building off of what Othman said, in terms of listening and learning, because not every discipline is the same. Not every publisher or society has the same challenges. So we really are looking for partners who can move quickly, who are API driven, who really focus on interoperability. And we as we did with our early integrity services, we started out just opening up the platform to be tested by all different groups, even though it wasn't the full solution, to get that feedback and see where we needed to adapt. Were things working with our tech partners? Did we miss some checks that we needed to have? So I think that's how we do it, is we look for the complementary nature of the offerings and how we can offer unique value by bringing together multiple partners together.
Othman, would you add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jen is spot on with the experimentation. I mean, it's very similar to, I think, the research life cycle itself. You start off with a hypothesis, and then you go through your process of trying to validate that through many different steps. And I think, from a technology standpoint and even a business model perspective, it centers around what is the hypothesis that you're starting with, and then what links are you willing to go to validate that hypothesis or invalidate it, right? Which is also a piece of the learning. And I think that process of investing and buying into a framework where you may see failure, right? You may see that you had a hypothesis and you thought that it would be the most amazing outcome, and it turns out when you went through and you had integrity with your own self as a company, as a system of building something, that at the end of that process, it may come out and say, hey, what you really thought was going to be successful is not actually the successful thing. So how do you now move to the next hypothesis and then challenge that hypothesis and work through? So I think you have to buy into that philosophy of being okay with failing, And through that failure, success will always come because you're learning something from every single step in that process. And I think we buy into that, wholeheartedly and holistically at Morressier. And I think that's a big piece of what we try to also in our partnerships and our conversations with publishers and societies and authors and editors, is to get that process of iterative growth and learning at every step of that process, and then taking those learnings and actually feeding it back into your technological and your business models and the way that you're approaching different problems and the way that you're thinking about different problems. That feedback loop becomes absolutely necessary to make sure that you're always improving, and at least you're on a linear line of getting closer and closer to a solution. And so sometimes it does become, how many experiments can you work through before you actually get to something that pops, something that is validated, something that sticks. And that's where speed, I think, as Jen was saying, speed is extremely important there, to try to get through as many experiments as possible and validate as many hypotheses as you can. And then that's where I think the feedback and the partnership between the technology partner and then the publisher, the society, or the entity that is actually seeing it in action starts to become, okay, how do we make it better now over time? How do we improve it? How do we take that first pragmatic step and then improve upon that continuously? And so that's something that we embed from a cultural perspective, even within the company in our own ways, right? And how we use our own product internally, and how we work with each other. So
yeah. So we test, we experiment, but what about prioritization? Because zeroing in on kind of research integrity as an issue, there are so many different types of fraud or misconduct or errors that we're trying to catch with research integrity solutions. So when it's such a fast moving kind of space and there's so many pressing challenges, how do we approach prioritization in the context of that experimentation and in those collaborations?
I think it's a matter of prioritizing and then reprioritizing rapidly based on the market feedback. I mean, for us, it's hard to establish, a 2-year roadmap today. You can know where you're going, you can have horizons in your roadmap, but essentially, it's prioritizing with your clients. It's looking where you can deliver the most value to the biggest pain problems first. Sometimes you might scratch a lower itch because you can get it out quickly. But I think prioritization is just building on what Othman said. It's all of those feedback loops, doing a lot of usability testing, checking things out with different stakeholders, and then just looking for those wins where you've made an impact.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to add to that as well, I think there is, if you take even a step back from when I started last year, I thought we were in this to solve the scale problem, right? How do we scale when we have systems that may be, holding us back or shackling us from being able to scale to the levels that we want to scale? That was the initial impression that I had coming in. And so it's like, okay, great, workflows solves that problem, and you'll have automation, and you'll have you'll lessen the number of steps that's needed to actually get the data that you need from your authors submitting, metadata or their, affiliations and all kinds of stuff, right? So there was an impression that if you can just solve the problem of scale, everything else works out. And I think as we went through more and more and more conversations with publishers and societies, it became more apparent that I'm too scared to scale if I haven't figured out the research integrity problem. So the technology that we had was based on a validation that, yes, there is a major issue in how we take the first idea and actually pull it all the way through to publication. That there is a fundamental problem that exists in how fast you can do that, right? And there are steps, and there's actual tangible scientific reasons for why something can be delayed in that process, because you want to authenticate and validate that this is the right type of science, and it's advancing the society in the right way, and it's advancing the field in the right way. But then the higher layer to that is, well, even if I can publish X amount, how do I know what I'm publishing is not going to come back and bite me in the behind later, right? And how do I know that what I published is the most, highest quality possible? And that became a repetitive point in every conversation that we had. So we had to take a step back and say, okay, we validated the point that workflows and taking a submission through the entire life cycle of the research process is crucial. But now there's a higher level of trepidation that is, well, even if I do scale, how do I validate that what I'm scaling to is actually the highest level of quality? And I think that's where we started to see these like penetrations of new technologies that were causing the systems that have been built over decades to not feel like they were equipped enough to handle that pressure. And I think that's where a new hypothesis comes up. It's like, okay, well, we know we had some underpinnings of research integrity, but now what if you scaled that to a level that has not been seen before, and you actually start to embed that in the workflow that you're saying is a big problem for scalability? If you can solve both of those problems at the same time, then it rapidly changes what you're prioritizing. And so I think for us, it's
That's right, because it's not just one time that you might be running pre-flight or integrity checks. It's all the way through the workflows.
Absolutely.
So you might run things between submission and peer review. You might run additional checks after peer review. You might run additional checks after a manuscript has gone through revision.
Yeah.
Actually, you might be terrified of what you've already published and want to get in front of your retraction. So there's an awful lot of places.
You can choose. Yeah.
It's easy to think of, oh, you run sort of automated checks once, but actually it's all throughout the life cycle. And I think we learned a lot about, okay, we need to configure this for all different stages of the workflows. And
Absolutely. So that's why it's like, you prioritize up to a point where then you can take a step back, and sometimes going slow is going faster, where you reprioritize based on what you're learning, because you can see within, at least a set of data, which is always the number one question that we, I think, ask to many of our partners, like, okay, well, what are the KPIs that you're trying to measure against? Like, what does success mean to you? Because it shouldn't be an arbitrary answer that we give to say, well, you're going to be successful because, it's just worth the amount that you're paying. No, what do you want to look at as a publisher or as a society? What do you want to look at as success? And what are those measures? What are those numbers? And then how do we then make that visible to you within the process? And I think that goes to the point where now the workflow is like that base level infrastructure. And on top of that, you can start to now see, okay, well, where are those points of friction within the workflow? And then you reprioritize based on what you're learning from within that. And so I think that's something, whether internally or externally, with our partners, it's that constant, well, let's launch an MVP, do some learnings on that. And then from those learnings, you can actually start to make your prioritization of really, all right, where's my biggest problem? Because your gut feeling of what the big problem might have been may not be what the data actually shows you on the ground. And I think that's you can't really measure what you can't see, or you can't change what you can't see.
Mhm.
And I think that's a fundamental philosophy that we try to embed within ourselves as Morressier, but also within our partners, to try to show them what it is
Mhm.
that could be prioritized.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, can we talk a little bit more maybe about, we talk a little bit about workflows and that whole publishing process and the role of something like our integrity checks dashboard throughout that process. So from the sort of development standpoint, how do we integrate those two? How do we balance those two so that we're not, adding further complications or migrations? Like, how do we sort of approach that in terms of partnership?
So what we realized is that we needed to create both a standalone service so that we didn't ask clients to have to walk away from their submission systems or go through huge hoops to use the service. And then we also embedded them inside of our workflows. So depending on a client or organization situation, they can take advantage of the same suite of tools inside our abstract management or proceedings or other workflows, or they can use this standalone service. And as their company is ready, they can then come into the workflows or do a deeper integration. So we tried to come at it from multiple different ways so that it wasn't just a one size fits all, because all of the organizations are different with different needs.
There's that flexibility.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, some of this, or a lot of those decisions come back from the feedback loop, right? We started to, with every conversation, so we do workflows. I mean, we do it from posters to abstracts to presentations. You also have it with your proceedings post-conference, and now we're kind of in this process of building out a journal submission workflow. So we have the workflow elements there. The point to Jen's, it's the feedback loop from the industry, from our partners that come back and say, okay, well, if you have a submission system right now, we're also on a submission system. We're on a much longer contract. It's going to take time to do migrations and to transition. But we know that research integrity is still a massive problem for us, irrespective of what system we're sitting on. So we kind of took that feedback and said, okay, you know what? It doesn't matter if a society or a publisher is on our workflow, they should still have access to be able to detect, at least at the human level, where they can make decisions on there's something problematic with this article, or there's something that meets a certain threshold that deserves to have human eyes look at this paper, look at this article, look at this proceedings, and go in and start to do their own assessment of whether this is valid or invalid. And so that's the kind of birth of the standalone dashboard, where it's saying, you know what, irrespective of the submission system that you're on, you could be on any of those submission systems, as long as you're able to, whether through bulk upload or through an API, that we can pull those submissions into a standalone dashboard, whatever is easiest for you, you can be able to then take thousands, hundreds of thousands of submissions and actually look at them at scale and say, what are the pre-flight level submission failures that are happening? They don't have ethics statements. They don't have the author contributions. They don't have, citations are not, figures are not cited properly. Get that flagged at scale. And then also have that married to actual integrity checks, right? So what are the tortured phrases that are identified in this paper? Are there retracted citations in that paper? And that gets flagged, and it actually tells you where this stuff is happening. And so that standalone capability, you may not have the ability to write it back into your submission system, because those APIs, unfortunately, with some of the main submission systems we have, are much more difficult. But you could at least take that data and start to make decisions on them, export them, interact with them, look at them at scale across multiple volumes or journals. And that is value that we saw that, our partners would be able to at least see the impact and feel the impact instantaneously, rather than needing to go through a entire workflow migration. And so that was kind of the birth of some of the conversations and discussions and feedback that we've been getting over the last few months that enabled us to be able to kind of launch that solution.
Yeah. So to just kind of close out our discussion, I want to bring it back to AI a little bit. Obviously, AI is kind of embedded throughout our integrity checks and throughout our whole strategy. So can we just talk a little bit about how we approach that risk and reward balance with AI, whether it's using it in our products, detecting it in submissions, or finding that balance?
I'm going to take that one first.
Yeah. Sure. So it's, and I worked for a number of years before joining Morressier at Google and AI. Now you see where we thought Google was the preeminent AI power in the world. And you saw that, just within that split second, the eminence of Microsoft could just accelerate, right? And we spent many years where like, oh yeah, nobody's ever going to catch up to this. The technology was embedded in all of our tools and all of the systems that all of us interact with on a regular basis. If you have Android, if you're using many of the Google products, and yet you saw within just a split second that innovation does not choose who it goes to, right? There's planning and work that happens over many years, over many months, and then there's moments in time where there's just a tipping point and there's a transition. And that innovation, that disruptive innovation, can come from anyone, any player at any time, and can affect systems and models and the ways that we've developed our own understanding of what reality or process should look like. And so it is sometimes hard for us to recalibrate in that moment, right? And I think all of us experienced that last October, last November, when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and there was a natural anxiety that built up, given the infrastructure that we're at, and that still happened at the greatest technology companies in the world. I mean, I still have many friends that worked at Google, and I was getting WhatsApp messages constantly of the P0 level impact that this had on a company that was priding itself in investments of billions of dollars into this technology, and yet still they were caught off guard. So imagine what was happening in an industry where we were thinking there was some level of insulation from this. And so there is a natural level of anxiety there. And I think we need to acknowledge that. We need to say that that's okay to feel anxious, that it's fine to feel that we may be caught off guard. Now, can we learn from the situation and say, how do we have a little bit more foresight into some of the new technological advancements that may continue to come that disrupt our models and disrupt the way that we think about things? But so we really embrace it. We embrace the challenge that innovative technologies bring, because one, either you are the disruptor or you're being disrupted. And if you look at it as positive on both ends, you're going to learn from that situation. You're going to, right now, Google is mobilizing to try to now, combat the disruption that they got from Microsoft. And it's the same cycle that Microsoft went through when they were disrupted by Google. And it's this constant innovation cycle that continues to go, and we fully buy into it. We fully believe in it, and we want to work with our partners and our clients to also believe in it, and to not be, to allow that anxiety to drive us to, how to prepare for it next, and how to build resilient systems and products and platforms that allow us to rise to the challenge when those innovations come up. And I think that's part of the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, and maybe not see it as just all good or all bad, right? Because in terms of, we were talking earlier with some folks about inclusion and inclusion in the submission process. So if you have authors who are non-native English speakers and they happen to use an AI bot to help them write part of the paper, maybe it's the introduction, maybe it's just smooth up some of the language, is that of less concern than, plagiarism and using and copying other people's work? And so it's really adjusting, right, your sentiments around how AI is used and what parts of a paper submission it's used. So it's, and the tools that we know we have to build as a result are helping to look at sections of papers and where those flags should exist, so that folks can make really good decisions and not just utterly dismiss a paper because there's some indication of AI generated text.
It's all about the context.
That's right.
So I think that brings us pretty much to time, but I want to open it up if there's one quick question before we all depart to our next sessions. Okay, we've answered everything. AI is solved. We're done. Solutions found.
Over here.
Yes.
That's right. So just, I think to repeat the question, APIs you're saying are constantly being updated. And how do we adjust to that fact that we need to invest in those updates? Is that your question? Essentially. Yeah, it's an investment and it's a commitment, and it's keeping roadmaps close together with our partners and being flexible. And the way we build the interoperability is really important. So it's absolutely an issue, but it's what we've taken on as a provider of the tools.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us.